Ain't gonna let nobody, Lordy, turn me round, turn me round.
The ecumenical civil rights pilgrimage to Montgomery and Selma, Alabama, illuminated the deep scars of racism, slavery, and cruelty in ways that will forever leave an imprint on each pilgrim's heart and soul. Now that we know what we know and we've seen what we've seen, we cannot unknow it.
Nobody, Lordy, turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody, Lordy, turn me round. Keep on a walking, Lordy, keep on a talking, Lordy, marching after freedom.
It was a very traumatizing moment for me. Again, you know, you could read all you want and see all you want, but till you physically see that kind of stuff occur, it was so traumatic for me to know that millions and millions of African American people were enslaved in the way that they were, the way that it occurred, the way that they were treated. All of that was just a traumatic moment for me.
This is the emotional weight of confronting the realities of our history. Beyond intellectual knowledge, it was the transformational experience of bearing witness. As we walked through the history of the fight for civil rights, we carry this sacred truth.
There's a way in which the generations of people, not only through the centuries of slavery in this country, but the further century and a half of Jim Crow laws, of racial terror, lynching, of the fight for fairness in the courtrooms, the mass incarceration, the differences in how people are sentenced and convicted according to the color of their skin.
In the 17th and 18th centuries, 12 million African people were kidnapped, chained, and brought to the Americas by way of a torturous and unimaginably brutal journey across the Atlantic Ocean. Nearly 2 million people died during the voyage. The labor of enslaved Black people fueled economic growth throughout the United States, where an ideology of white supremacy and racial difference was created to justify the system of slavery and somehow make it morally acceptable.
When we look at what we human beings are capable of doing, it is daunting. And it's daunting to think that we are the species that lives our lives and gauges our actions according to our narrative, how we understand the world to be, how we understand the order of things and what ought to be. If that kind of imagination and that kind of narrative can take us down such horrendous roads, it can also be that which takes us down the road toward seeing ourselves as part of the whole and being part of the healing, being part of the restoration, being part of the reparation, the part of what can bring justice again.
In the 19th century, the demand for enslaved labor grew. A thriving plantation economy in the United States and forcible taking of land from Native people generated the domestic slave trade, and Black people suffered brutal abuse and mistreatment. Nearly half of all enslaved people were separated from their children, spouses, parents, and siblings during the slave trade.
So many families were broken that they divided wives and husbands and children, and so many never had the chance to find them again.
After the South's defeat in the bloody Civil War of 1865, the 13th Amendment was enacted, prohibiting involuntary servitude and forced labor, but leaving intact a bitter resistance to racial equality. Thousands of Black people were murdered by asserting freedom or basic human rights.
To walk across the bridge where Bloody Sunday occurred and to realize that there were literally blood, sweat, and tears of our ancestors, of people that walked across the bridge for our freedom, and to know that the work was not in vain, but we are still fighting the same fight in different ways. So I feel honored to be a product of their bravery, their courage, but I also feel compelled to do more because we're still fighting for those very same rights, just in different ways.
A 6-year study published in 2017 by the Equal Justice Initiative found that over 4,000 Black men, women, and children fell victim to racial terror lynchings in 12 southern states between 1877 and 1950. Besides the 300 that took place in other states, lynchings in America targeted racial violence perpetuated to uphold an unjust social order. Lynchings are terrorism.
While everything I learned on this trip I did know, I have a deeper understanding now of the terror of slavery and Jim Crow, the bravery of the civil rights movement, and the continual mass incarceration and lynchings that continue today, that we need to do whatever we can to bring racial justice and social justice to this nation.
Racial inequality continued well beyond the passing of the 13th Amendment and continues today. Segregation, limitations of voting rights, lynchings, mass incarceration. Civil rights heroes have led brave boycotts, marches, and rallies in both Montgomery and Selma, as well as in other places such as Birmingham. Today, we must be the voices for justice, advocates for change, and co-creators of a more inclusive, equitable, and just future. The Civil Rights Pilgrimage was more than a journey. It is a call to listen deeply, learn profoundly, and recommit ourselves to the ongoing work of racial justice. It invites us to bear witness to the past, but not as distant history, but as a living narrative that continues to shape our present and future actions. Through every site visited and every story shared, we felt the weight of both the suffering endured and the courage displayed by those who fought and continue to fight for freedom and equality. We cannot unsee the truth we encountered, nor can we remain unchanged by them. The pilgrimage calls us to return to our roots, to go back and understand the struggles that brought us here today, and it urges us to move forward with purpose, carrying the lessons of the past into our lives and into our communities, challenging systems of injustice and working for for reconciliation. This is not the end of a journey. It is a new beginning. We know what we know, and we have seen what we have seen.
Ain't gonna let nobody, Lordy, turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody, Lordy, turn me round. Keep on walking, Lordy, keep on talking, Lordy, marching up to freedom land. Ain't gonna let segregation, Lordy, turn me round.